Rhetorical devices.
What are rhetorical devices? Rhetoric is effective persuasive language which can be understood using Aristotle's rhetorical appeals. However, whilst it's important to recognize and analyze pathos, ethos, and logos, these appeals are quite general. Rhetorical devices, on the other hand, are specific techniques that can be used to underline the messages of our arguments. They work by having an impression on the audience. They make what you are saying memorable and impactful. Rhetorical questions. How can raising a question not be a good way of getting an audience to listen to you? A lot of people think of rhetorical questions as questions that don't need an answer. However, whilst that description might be true, it doesn't fully define the purpose or effect of a rhetorical question. Most importantly, a rhetorical question is used to emphasize a point. By posing one of these questions, the speaker is trying to make the audience think or feel in a particular way. We can see good examples of rhetorical questions by Barack Obama in his remarks by the President in Address to the Nation on Immigration in 2014. Barack Obama used this speech to explain his decision to enact immigration reforms that would protect some people living in America illegally from deportation.
Are we a nation that tolerates the hypocrisy of a system where workers who pick our fruit and make our beds never have a chance to get right with the law? Or are we a nation that gives them a chance to make amends, take responsibility, and give their kids a better future? Are we a nation that accepts the cruelty of ripping children from their parents' arms? Or are we a nation that values families and works together to keep them together?
This speech continues to go on to use two more rhetorical questions. Can you see what he is doing here? He isn't asking American people these questions to find out their opinions. He's provoking feelings and thoughts. He wants them to realize it is unfair to use migrants for work and deny them rights. He wants them to remember the ideas of striving for a better future that are associated with America and the American dream. He wants them to feel disgusted by the treatment that immigrants face, and he wants his audience to relate to them as members of a family rather than criminals. He does all of this through questions. By asking rhetorical questions, the speaker invites the audience to consider things from a particular perspective, to think about things in a particular way, to feel about things with particular emotions. The rule of three. There's something appealing about patterns of three. A trio is just more satisfying than other numbers. Just consider some of our favourite children's stories. When it comes to persuading people, we can use 3 adjectives, provide 3 reasons, or give 3 examples to make sure we make an impact. A good example of the rule of 3 can be seen in General MacArthur's West Point Address in 1962. This was General MacArthur's farewell address to the cadets at the military school.
Duty, honor, country. Those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn.
In this speech, he urged the cadets to live by the patriotic values of the army, which he organised into a trio: duty, honour, country. He continued to use the rule of 3 to explain what these values should be used for and why they are so beneficial. Read the excerpt back and remove one of the items from each list. It just doesn't sound the same, does it? It doesn't have the same impact. Extreme or absolute language. Whenever we persuade people, we want them to believe us. We don't want them to feel uncertain about what we are saying. Extreme or absolute language helps us do this by removing doubt. It does this by claiming that something is the most extreme of its kind. For example, something isn't good, it's the best. It isn't bad, it's the worst. Or, if you're speaking to a group, this language shows that you're speaking to everyone. A good example of this can be found in Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty.
King wants to achieve freedom for everyone, everywhere. He communicates this idea through words like every and all. By doing so, his message cannot be mistaken. It applies to all people all over America. Analogy. An analogy is all about drawing links and making connections. It's a lot like a simile or metaphor. However, the focus of an analogy isn't just to compare, but to make a point. Consider this. A teenager is trying to persuade his mom not to confiscate his mobile phone. He could say that it would be unfair to take his phone because it's like his best friend. It reminds him about things so he doesn't forget. It informs him of things that he doesn't know, and it entertains him when he is bored. This analogy links a phone to a best friend to make a point. He values the phone just like a best friend, so it would be unfair to take it away from him. In his campaign address, Huey Long uses an analogy to make a point about politicians in America.
The Democratic Party and the Republican Party was just like the old patent medicine drummer that used to come around our country. He had 2 bottles of medicine. He'd play a banjo and he'd sell 2 bottles of medicine. One of those bottles of medicine was called High-Papa-Lower. And another one of those bottles of medicine was called Low-Papa-High. Finally, somebody around that said, is there any difference in these medicines? Oh, he said, considerable. They're both good, but they're different. He said that High-Papa-Lower is made from the bark off the tree that we take from the top down. And that Low-Papa-High is made from the bark that we take from the root up. And the only difference that I have found between the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership was that one of them was skinning from the ankle up and the other from the ear down when I got to Congress.
In this analogy, he convinces people that as a politician, he is going to stand for them in ways other politicians don't. He achieves this by comparing the other parties in general to a bogus medicine seller. He also compares each party to 2 knockoff medicines that are made from the same ingredients. Through this comparison, Huey Long makes a point, that the politicians in charge are cheats and that there's no real diversity in the political system. Parallelism. This is a repeated use of a sentence structure to emphasize a point. You can imagine these similar sentence structures placed next to each other like the rails on a train track. It can give you a writing balance, it can give it clarity, and it can give it rhythm. It is used to hammer a point home again and again and again. In his inauguration speech, Barack Obama begins with the use of parallelism that gives the speech a sense of flow and hammers home the message that he is there to serve the people of America.
My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you've bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors.
Through the use of parallelism, Obama achieves a sense of dignity and humility. Each one of these structures gives the message that he is aware of his position in a larger system that is in place to serve and benefit the people and nation of America. It really hammers home the point that he is trying to make, that he is not a selfish tyrant, but a humble servant. Anaphora. This is a type of parallelism where structures aren't only repeated, but entire words or phrases are repeated at the beginning of successive lines. Perhaps the most famous example of this device is in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Not only does the repetition of this phrase give a sense of patient cohesion to what he is saying, it gives it weight too. It emphasizes the difference between how things are and how he hopes they would be. Each I have a dream reiterates the point that what he dreams of is not a reality. It emphasizes that his hopes, that America will become a nation where people are treated equally, where people of different races can eat in harmony, where black Americans can live in a free and just society, and where people are judged by the merits of their character and not by the colour of their skin, are just dreams. Epistrophe. Like anaphora, this is a type of parallelism that uses repeated words or phrases, but rather than repeating the words or phrases at the beginning of consecutive sentences or clauses, they are repeated at the end. In his special message to Congress, The American Promise, President Johnson spoke of his support for voting rights for all Americans. In order to convince Americans to come together on the issue, he uses epistrophe.
There is no Negro problem. There is no Southern problem. There is no Northern problem. There is only an American problem. And we are met here tonight as Americans, not as Democrats or Republicans. We are met here as Americans to solve that problem.
By repeatedly ending the sentences with the word problem, President Johnson emphasizes the weight of this problem, demonstrating that it is everywhere and needs immediate attention. Symptosis. This is yet another example of parallelism that uses repeated words and phrases. This time, successive lines begin the same way and they end the same way. Symplosis, simply, is a combination of anaphora and apostrophe. Malcolm X once used this technique in a speech in Harlem to give his argument power.
Much of what I say might sound bitter, but it's the truth. Right. Much of what I say might sound like it's stirring up trouble, but it's the truth. Right. Much of what I say might sound like it is hate, but it's the truth.
Through the use of symplosis, Malcolm X emphasizes the point that his words might not be kind, but they are honest. Through the repetition at the beginning and the end of each line, he juxtaposes the way that people might perceive his words and ideas with what he sees as being reality. At the beginning of each section, he sets up how people who weren't willing to accept rights for black Americans constantly perceive him, and at the end of each sentence, he repeatedly squashes them with the idea that he is merely describing an unmoving, unchanging reality. Allusion. An allusion is a reference. It points at something, and in doing so, it connects itself to that thing, piggybacking on the meaning and emotions connected to it. When a speaker uses an allusion in a speech, They reach across time and space and empower their words by connecting them to something else that has historical or cultural significance. Martin Luther King does this at the beginning of his I Have a Dream speech.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
This is an allusion to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which he begins with the phrase 77 years ago. A score here refers to the number 20. Rather than mentioning Abraham Lincoln by name, King alludes to him by imitating the opening of his historic speech. Despite the Civil War continuing for 2 more years, Lincoln's speech at Gettysburg is considered to mark the point when America became a united whole again, along with added freedoms for black Americans. Through the use of this allusion, King establishes a link between his vision of liberty and justice and Abraham Lincoln's. Hyperfora is like a Q&A, only with yourself. You pose a question, but rather than waiting for somebody to offer an answer, you answer it yourself. The speaker isn't raising a question to gather information, they are trying to make an impact. This can prove persuasive, as it gives the impression that you've considered other viewpoints and objections. It also gives the impression that you are having a dialogue with your audience, thus making them feel more involved in your speech. And it portrays the speaker as being confident and in control. A good example of hyperfora can be seen in John F. Kennedy's commencement address at American University, 1963, which is titled A Strategy of Peace. In this speech, Kennedy outlines a plan towards world peace that curbs nuclear powers.
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave, or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children.
Here, we see Kennedy inviting the audience into his speech by eliciting a curiosity about his message with a question. Then, he appears to be in full control with an immediate answer. As you can see, Rhetorical Devices make great speeches.
Who believe that America is a constant work in progress. Who believe that loving this country requires more than singing its praises or avoiding uncomfortable truths. It requires the occasional disruption, the willingness to speak out for what is right, to shake up the status quo. That's America.
Rhetorical Devices underline your messages.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?
Rhetorical Devices have a huge impact on your audience.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Rhetorical Devices make speeches memorable for the right reasons.
I pledge you that we shall neither commit nor provoke aggression, that we shall neither flee nor invoke the threat of force, that we shall never negotiate out of fear, and we shall never fear to negotiate.
Not for the wrong ones.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. Oh, I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said.